We often focus too much on our limitations and forget about God's immense power. Remember, what's impossible for us is possible for God. Miracles don't occur because we admit our incapability. They happen when we trust that God can do the impossible. To witness miracles in our lives and in others, we must firmly believe in God's ability to act powerfully. If we don't believe in God's capacity to perform miracles, we are unlikely to see them happen. Let's have faith in God's miraculous power and anticipate extraordinary things in our lives. When we communicate with God daily, our question should be, God, what is your will for me today? What do you want me to accomplish? Instead of instructing God on how to solve issues, we should seek His guidance. We ought to look for His direction in overcoming challenges and realizing our ambitions, depending on His wisdom and guidance, rather than just sticking to our routines and expecting His endorsement. David, a character from Bible, serves as an excellent illustration of this principle. When he ascended to kingship and was faced with a conflict, he didn't just plunge into fray. Even with his extensive combat experience, he sought God's counsel first, asking, "Should I engage in this battle? Will you grant me victory?" This indicates that he didn't presume God's backing. He understood the importance of seeking God's perspective, not merely banking on his previous achievements. David's method teaches us the importance of soliciting God's direction before confronting challenges. It's imprudent to leap into situations assuming God's support. We should rather ask, God, what is your design? Should I confront this challenge directly, or should I step back and allow you to take the lead? By doing this, we acknowledge our reliance on God's insight and might. When David received affirmation from God that he would triumph, he proceeded and achieved victory over the Philistines. His story encourages us to seek divine guidance in our everyday actions, ensuring we proceed with God's endorsement. If we adopt David's strategy and consult God before engaging in conflicts or making significant decisions, we can avoid much unnecessary hardships and sorrow. When God directs us onto a path, He equips us for the journey. However, He is not obliged to ensure success in endeavors that are not aligned with His will. Although God is compassionate and ready to aid, it is far preferable to seek His advice before embarking on significant ventures. Discernment is not a one-time event, but an ongoing process of seeking to align our thoughts, desires, and actions with God's will. It requires a heart that is humble and surrendered to God, and a willingness to obey Him even when it may be difficult or uncomfortable. Discerning God's will is not always easy, as it can sometimes be confusing or even contradictory to our own desires or the expectations of others. However, it is essential to remember that God's will is always good, perfect, and pleasing, and it ultimately leads to our spiritual growth, joy, and fulfillment. As we seek to discern God's will, it is essential to avoid relying solely on our own understanding and wisdom, and instead to seek the guidance of the Holy Spirit, who helps us to understand God's plan and desires for us. Through a deepening relationship with God, we can gain clarity, direction, and peace in our decision making and live a life that honors and glorifies Him. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5 and 6. Gideon was a man from the tribe of Manasseh who was called by God to lead the Israelites in battle against Midianites. At first, Gideon was unsure whether he had heard from God correctly, so he asked for a sign to confirm God's will. He placed a fleece of wool on the ground and asked God to make the fleece wet with dew while keeping the ground around it dry. God granted his request, and the fleece was wet while the ground was dry. Still uncertain, Gideon asked for another sign. This time he asked that the fleece be dry while the ground around it was wet. God granted his request again. Gideon was now certain that God was with him and that he was being called to lead the Israelites in battle. Through Gideon's story, we see that discerning God's will often requires patience, humility, and a willingness to seek confirmation. Gideon did not immediately rush into the battle, but instead sought confirmation from God through the two signs with the fleece. In doing so, he showed that he was willing to submit to God's will and follow His guidance. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will. Romans chapter 12, verse 2. As you discern God's will, it is important to surrender your plans and desires to Him. This means trusting that God's plan for your life is greater than your own and being willing to follow His lead even when it's difficult or uncomfortable. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 11. Aligning your purpose with God's will also involves living a life that is in accordance with His values and commands. This means seeking to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. It also means living a life that is characterized by humility, obedience, and service. When you align your purpose with God's will, you will find joy and fulfillment and a sense of purpose that can only come from living a life that is fully devoted to Him.